Hey parents, Dr. Tony Ebel here, and I want to talk to you about the number one missing link and really most overlooked challenge, which then becomes the solution in gross motor development. I really want to reach out to parents here who have your children in physical therapy, pediatric PT, and you're doing a ton. I mean, some of our favorite providers that we always collaborate and partner with in care of our kiddos is pediatric PTs. And even for PTs, this is an awesome message because when they see this, which is a lot of times kind of right in front of all of us as providers and parents, but it's just so easy to overlook this number one missing link. PTs love this neurodevelopmental conversation we're going to have here because it gives so many solutions. It gives so many answers to unlock your child's progression and potential through PT. And that's what we're looking to solve with this video. So many families notice that their children are doing once a week, twice a week, maybe 3 times a week PT, and they kind of stall out or they get plateaued or they get stuck. And you're trying everything you can to decrease tension in certain extremities, to try and lessen things like toe walking and tension in the lower extremities or the upper extremities. You're trying to strengthen the core and improve tone. So this is a conversation about tone and about coordination, and we're going to get really nerdy with it, but we're going to keep it really simple so that you can find that missing link for your child. So please share this video with your PT. Please share this video with other families you know who need to get this information because they're working through gross motor and just overall motor milestones and development for their child. So the first thing I want to teach you here today is that we got to put 5 letters in front of that 5-letter word. So this is really about neuromotor development. So N-E-U-R-O, the nervous system, the central and autonomic nervous system on its own has a tone or kind of a setting to it, okay? Think of it like a dimmer switch or even like an engine on a car. And a good, healthy tone is a relaxed but also strong and ready at the same time tone. An unhealthy nervous system has a mix of both. Too much tone, too much tension, and then also other areas that are too little or too weak. You can't have a weak core. You don't end up with lack of tone or less weakened tone if you don't first have stuck, tight, tense, kind of wasted energy tone somewhere else. So what we find all the time is that kiddos who are struggling with gross motor development, they have tension maybe in their lower extremities and other sort of places, but they have weakness in their core. And the parents are always trying to do things like stretches or massages to decrease the tension somewhere, and then strengthening exercises to bring up that tone. Well, the most overlooked system in gross motor development. In fact, if you even just Google gross motor development, you read articles about the extremities, about the arms, about the legs, and about the core, or maybe even the pelvis. But there's actually something that develops first. The way God designed us is that there is a central hub of neuromotor function first. I want you to think of the spine, and we're going to actually kind of rename it from what it looks like in anatomy textbooks. It's called the neurospinal system in our work, or another way we could say the neuromuscular spinal system. See, the spine is 20 plus different vertebrae filled with literally so many intricate muscle connections going in all sorts of different directions. And you can even break down this neurospinal system almost into kind of 3 tiers of one motor system: neck, thoracic or torso, and then the lumbosacral or the lumbopelvic system. And the way motor development is actually supposed to happen is neck first, then torso, then core. So think of a baby's motor development. They're supposed to be able to use their jaw to turn, latch, nurse, eat, swallow. Then they're supposed to develop their head and neck, then tummy time with the torso, then they roll over, then they engage the core, and they go through the motor development, neuromotor development in that way. So the first thing I want to teach you, the number one missing link in gross motor development, is to actually evaluate the hub of the extremities, the hub of the core. See, the spine, or really better term for this video, the neurospinal system, is the most important motor system in the entire body. Every single movement that's going to go into the muscles of our arms or our legs, all the way from our pinky finger to our pinky toe, before those things move and can initiate movement, there is actually a neuromotor activation within the spine and within the neurospinal system that sets it in motion. So if a child is delayed or struggling with their motion gross motor, it actually has to start in the central hub, and we need to look there first. So that's the word I want you to think of this as, a hub. We're going to start with the neck first and then the neurospinal system, and we're actually going to have a little fun with this. We're going to teach it to you through a really rad case study here about motor development. So we're actually going to look at this beautiful little girl named Tegan. Tegan came to us for an intensive program at our clinic. That is where twice a day they're getting adjusted with the neurologically focused neurotonal. We call our is what our protocols and technique are. And she came and she got twice a day adjustments for 2 weeks, because up until that point, kind of getting a little bit close to her third birthday, she had been doing PT for almost 2 years and still was not able to stand or walk on her own despite exhausting everything. Additionally, Tegan really struggled with sleep. She really struggled with constipation. I'll talk about the neurology behind that. Almost every single child with motor developmental issues has gut issues, respiratory, lymphatic drainage issues. Their body just doesn't move well on the outside, so it doesn't move well on the inside. So we're looking at Tegan's what are called insight scans. When we post up this video, I'll have the team link an article that explains more and shows you more about these insight scans. It is really the missing link to the missing link. Once you see how important the neurospinal system is, you can see that what we need to do is have you be able to add a pediatric chiropractor to your team to not just evaluate the core and the extremities, but to evaluate the hub. And this technology, even more so than just kind of palpation and posture and movement assessments that a lot of movement therapies do, we can actually use this insight technology to measure, quantify, and locate what's called a subluxation, which gets in the way of this neuromotor function. So the first thing I want to show you on the very left is what we call her thermal scan. So what you'll see if I zoom in on this is her thermal scan is actually showing us a ton of tension at what's called the atlas and the axis area of the neurospinal system. The atlas is nicknamed that because it's said to hold up the weight of the world. Brain function has a brain stem, is really, really correlated around atlas. So is this very important thing called the vagus nerve. And then also you'll see with Tegan that her tension has this counter torque. On the other side, she has this huge cluster of stress at C2, C3, the axis. The total function of C1 and C2 together in this brainstem, that is where all cerebellar neuromotor coordination happens. Think of this area here as air traffic control. Literally, the tone of the muscles just around the base of the skull and the neck account for 33% of all neuromotor sensory input into the brain. If it accounts for 1/3, I mean, these are tiny little muscles and tiny little vertebrae on our tiny little kiddos, and it's responsible for 1/3 of the input into the brain. That's how important that is. So now if we follow it and we look at her EMG scans, she has her most amount of tension into her neck on the EMG scan. So now we can actually measure motor tone through technology. So we're measuring electromyography, which is what's called surface spinal, and we can measure the tension on the neurospinal system. If we look at this, what we call amplitude scan, you'll see tons of tension in there in her system. And then this is a big one for neuromotor development and the gross motor milestones missing link. You'll see that all of her neurospinal tension is excessively activated on the left side. Some of these are actually, I know it's a little blurry when I zoom in, some of them are showing that the muscles on the left side of her neurospinal system, and really it's the nerves on the left side of her system, are 400% or more tight and more tense than the other side. So this is what we call asymmetry, okay? Oh, I can't. I should be able to spell better. I'm just going to take that one off. There's 2 M's in there. I'm sorry to my spelling teacher back in school there. And so now all of this gets measurements where we can see, oops, as I try and move along, I'm making notes on here. Now we look at what's called a pattern graph. And I know we're nerdy, but trust me, these are the scans you gotta have. If your child has even a little bit of gross and then fine, if you have gross motor development, you got fine motor development. If you have gross motor issues, you probably got constipation and immune issues. If you got gross motor issues, you probably got sensory, emotional, social, behavioral issues. The gross motor system is the ticket to getting these kids better. And again, I know it's blurry, but that says 413 and that number says 50. These should all be around 100. So that number being 4 times too high and that number being half as high as it should means subluxation has 2 problems. Number 1 is tone. And you're actually going to end up with both. So subluxation is our word for what chiropractors find and take care of, and it's the missing link to helping these kiddos. We'll link articles to teach you about subluxation. We'll link articles to teach you about this thing called dysautonomia, which is the result of all this, and we'll link an article to the insight scans. So the first problem with subluxation is that you end up with areas of too much tone. The most common subluxation comes from birth trauma. That's where Tegan's came from. So C-section, forceps, vacuum. These are the kids who were colicky, torticollis, plagiocephaly when they were little. So you have increased tone in the neck and the neurospinal system, but then that's going to cause decreased tone in the core. So that is why her pattern, you'll see right here, the signal collapses on her scan. So she has tension in her neck and in her torso, but she had weakness in her core. So no matter how much PT, no matter how much incentives they went to try and strengthen her core, you could have KT taped it, done anything. That core is not going to stay stable because of that. The second thing that happens with subluxation is incoordination, okay? And incoordination is just a nerdy word for they can't balance. Gravitational imbalances. So their ability to keep the right side of the brain, which controls the muscles on the left side of the body, and the left side of the brain, which controls the muscles on the right side of the body, in sync, in symmetry, and coordinated, goes down. So Tegan has a real doozy of a subluxation here. Tegan's birth was quite traumatic and had a lot of challenges, and so this is a case where the subluxation is really clearly seen. There is no little subluxation. Sure, there's subluxations that are not as neurologically jamming things up and confusing them as Tegan's, but if your child has even a little bit of gross motor delays, even if they're just a little bit too tight and too tense, or a little bit too weak and too incoordinated in other areas, it affects their brain development. And the brain, as they go from 2 to 3, those parts of the brain that are literally supposed to be fed good information, organized, coordinated information from the body to the brain, then that goes to the prefrontal cortex, the parietal, and it's in charge of speech and communication. It's in charge of sensory, emotional, behavioral regulation. And so if you have a motor system, a neuromotor developmental system that is too tight, too tense in some places, too weak and too suppressed in others, and incoordinated or confused, you're going to have a brain that gets too wound up too easily or is too exhausted too easily. And you're going to have a disorganized, struggling neurodevelopment as a whole. That is one of the nerdiest videos that even I have done, and I am rather nerdy, but I hope I was able to teach it to you in pretty easy to understand language between this tension, tone, incoordination, and just really thinking about how that shows up for your child every day and as they're trying to move through life. You can see it with the scans. So I'll put it in summary. Number one most under-evaluated, therefore not taken care of part of gross motor development is the neurospinal system, and we would actually hone in even further on the neck and the cervical spine and the brainstem, and really going back to birth trauma, going back to find out if there was things like emergency C-section, induction, forceps, vacuum, cord wrap, breech, torticollis, colic, constipation. If there's any of those things, then that's going to be a child who goes down this road. So finding that subluxation and tension on the neurospinal system is the missing link for countless families. And in order to find it, we got to find you a pediatric chiropractor who knows to look for it, who knows and uses the technology, and then has the protocols with what we call these neurotonal adjustments to take tension off of the area that is too tight, to bring adjustments that are activating and stimulating and strengthening to the areas of the core and the torso that are too weak, and then organizes the nervous system. See, the coolest thing that I barely touched on when we were looking at scans is we know exactly how to take care of that. We know the exact adjustments. This isn't your regular chiropractor or an average chiropractor. This is a pediatric trained chiropractor who does a neurotonal technique and who uses this insight scan technology. So I know it's a lot of different kind of criteria you got to match when you're talking about finding those chiropractors, like at our office, are the ones that we train, but that's the work we do, and we have an entire network that we can help you find. If you're not local to where I practice, don't worry, we've got you. Simply put your name, your name, I guess if it's on social media, be on there. If you want to, in the comments, put your city and state in there if you're looking for help, if you'd like help finding a pediatric chiropractor. And if you don't want to put in the comments, not a problem at all. Shoot us a direct message or reach out to us through the websites, and we will help you find if that subluxation is in your child's neurospinal system, if that truly is the missing link to get your child's gross motor system back on track, because then their gut, then their immune system, then their speech, then their social, then their emotion, then their brain will be on track as well. This is a common problem that's a big deal, and finding that missing link could mean all the difference in the world for your family. God bless, be well. We'll see you on the next one.